Hi there, students. A handful. A handful. Okay, a noun, a countable noun. The amount that you can hold in your hand. He gave me a handful of sweets. He had a handful of nuts, and he gave me some of them. He put his hand into his pocket and produced a handful of banknotes, and then he gave me some of them. Okay, so the amount of something that you can hold in your hand, a countable noun. A handful, a small number of people, a number of things. So I invited lots and lots of people to the party. I invited lots of people to the event, but only a handful turned up. Yeah, most of them didn't come. There were only a handful of students at my lesson, and that was rather depressing. Okay, so a handful, a small number of things. Let's see, this project is going very well, but there are a handful of small problems that need to be resolved. And then you can also call a person a handful. This is somebody who's very, very difficult to control. So looking after 5-year-old twins can be really difficult because they're a real handful. When he gets drunk, he's a handful. He's very difficult to control. Okay, so he's a real handful. He's very difficult to look after. So a handful, a few, especially very few if you compare it to a larger group. So most teachers just traditionally give English class in the classroom, but a handful use the internet, and even fewer make video classes like this. A handful, the amount that you can hold in your hand. So he picked up a handful of sand and showed it to me. A handful, a difficult person, a person that's difficult to control, difficult to manage. This motorbike is really, really powerful. It's a 1.5 litre engine. And it's a real handful. It's difficult to control. Teenagers can be a real handful. There's no telling them what to do. A handful of people, a group of people, a few people. So handful, the amount you can contain, a small number. Maybe 5, but not necessarily. A group of things, a number of things. And then something that can only be managed with difficulty. Yes, the workers are a real handful. They're difficult to manage. They're difficult to look after. My friend asked me to look after her dogs, and they're a real handful. They're difficult to manage. They're problematic. Okay, so a handful. The quantity that fills your hand. So throw in a handful of parsley into the dish. I was going to say a handful of chili. That would be too much, I think. A small amount. There were only a handful of people at the event. There were a handful of people sitting in the park. And then, until you've actually had kids, you would never know that kids can be such a handful. So, such a difficult thing to manage, such a problem, such a bother. Okay, so a handful, a relatively small amount. A handful of experts disagree with this. As much as your hand will hold, as much as can be held in the hand. Yeah, a handful of popcorn. Yeah, there were just a handful of cars on the road. Yeah, This guy is a real handful. He's been drinking. He's a real problem to manage. Okay, so a handful. There are a handful of exceptions to this rule, but not too many. A handful of people donated to the channel. There were a handful of customers in the bar. There were a handful of people waiting to ask me questions. A handful of sand, and it trickled through his fingers. This little girl is a real handful. You've got to keep a clear eye on her. So, formality, a handful. Okay, a handful of people, a handful of parsley, 5 informality, use anywhere. This kid is a handful. I think 4 informality. Use informally, use in a semi-formal conversation, semi-formal writing, but stop there. Okay, and that's it. So enough. If you enjoyed the video, give it a rating, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you soon. Bye for now. Handful.